from the heart of our nation's capital in Washington, D.C., bringing compelling interviews, insightful analysis, taking you beyond the headlines and sound bites into conversations with our nation's leaders and newsmakers, all from a biblical worldview. Sitting in for Tony is today's host, Jody Heiss.
Just had a great meeting, a really good, very productive meeting. We have one thing in common. We want this city of ours that we love to do very well.
That was President Trump earlier today in the White House after meeting with New York City Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani, a self-described Democratic Socialist. Welcome to this November 21st edition of Washington Watch. I'm your Friday host, Jody Heiss. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, coming up, the Trump administration is weighing possible sanctions on Nigeria as violence against Christian communities continues to rise there in Africa's most populous nation. And former U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, Sam Brownback, will be joining me later in the program to break all that down for us. Plus, a new Health and Human Services report is raising some serious questions about common claims from the radical left surrounding so-called gender transitions procedures for minors. And Dr. Jennifer Bowens, a senior fellow at the Family Research Council, will be joining us to explain what all that means. President Trump and New York City Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani finally came face-to-face at the White House today after months of trading jabs. And Mamdani, who, of course, is a self-described Democratic Socialist, was elected to become the first Muslim mayor in New York City's history after winning the November 4th election. And joining me now is Washington Stand reporter Casey Harper. Casey, I know you've been following the meeting between President Trump and New York City's mayor-elect Mamdani all day. What kind of updates do you have with us that you can share?
Yeah, Jody. Well, as you said, they held this meeting today. It was highly anticipated in a rare face-to-face. After months of trading insults, Trump's called Mamdani a communist, a nut job, and Mamdani's fired back. He's labeled the administration authoritarian and even called himself Trump's worst nightmare. But as I watched the meeting today in the press conference, it was pretty remarkable. Here's what Mamdani said.
It was a productive meeting focused on a place of shared admiration and love, which is New York City, and the need to deliver affordability to New Yorkers, the 8.5 million people who call our city their home, who are struggling to afford life in the most expensive city in the United States of America.
The two men were remarkably friendly, Jody. Both said that they discussed ways in their private meeting to make New York City more affordable, and they look forward to more areas where they can work together. Trump even credited Mamdani for running a strong campaign, although he's previously threatened to pull federal funding from the city. For Trump's part, the meeting offered a chance to address rising cost of living concerns, something he's been very focused on, as has Mamdani. But for Mamdani, it was also a national platform to show he can stand up to the president. Now, despite their differences, both signaled in what they said and in their body language that the door remains open for future cooperation, at least for now, Jody.
Well, it's good to see at least some signs of civility. Hopefully we'll be able to see that not only between those two, but across the board more broadly throughout politics. Congress held a hearing yesterday, Casey, on the persecution of Christians in Nigeria. And I was curious how the administration is responding to this whole challenge of religious freedom that seems to be a problem around the entire world right now.
Yeah, Jody, things are only getting worse in Nigeria. In fact, armed gangs in the country carried out multiple kidnappings and attacks just this week. So on Monday, gunmen attacked a church, killing 2 and abducting 38 worshipers. And another 52 girls were kidnapped from a Catholic school in another part of Nigeria, and I believe that happened in the middle of the night. Now, attacks like these, which are pretty shocking, are why the U.S. is weighing sanctions and increased counterterrorism measures to pressure Nigeria to better protect these Christian communities. And as you mentioned, this congressional hearing yesterday, Congressman Chris Smith, who's the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Africa, he expressed concern over this ongoing violence against Christians in Nigeria.
Nigeria is ground zero, the focal point of the most brutal and murderous anti-Christian persecution in the world today. I applaud President Trump's recent decisive action to redesignate Nigeria as a country of particular concern for engaging in and tolerating severe violations of religious freedom. Militant Fulani herdsmen are terrorists. They steal and vandalize, they kill and boast about it, they kidnap and rape, and they enjoy total impunity from elected officials.
As he said, D.C. has placed Nigeria back on the list of countries of particular concern, and President Trump notably has even threatened military action if Nigeria's leadership fails to stop these attacks on Christians. At yesterday's hearing, Jonathan Pratt, who's a senior official at the State Department, this is what he said.
The Trump administration is developing a plan to incentivize and compel the Nigerian government to better protect Christian communities and improve religious freedom. This plan will consider U.S. state and Treasury engagement on sanctions, as well as possible Department of War engagement on counterterrorism and other efforts to protect religious communities.
Now, Nigerian leaders, they insist the situation is more complicated and that they are working to protect religious groups. U.S. officials say the new designation has grabbed Nigeria's attention, but they stress that more needs to be done to protect these Christian communities, Jody.
Well, so much going on there, Casey. That is a huge story. We're certainly keeping the Christian community there in Nigeria in our thoughts and prayers, and encouraged to see some steps, at least to address this issue. The administration is working to address another big conflict, Casey, and that has to do with an attempt to end the war in Ukraine. What updates do you have for us there?
Yeah, Jody. So the U.S. has drafted a 28-point peace plan to end the war in Ukraine, and both Kiev and Moscow are now reviewing it. So this proposal, what's in it? Well, it would give Russia significant concessions, including more territory, and it would also limit Ukraine's military size, and importantly, it would block them from joining NATO in the future. But it does require Russia to pull back from some occupied areas. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, he says Kiev is facing one of their toughest moments in their history. And he said his country has a tough choice, either lose their dignity or lose their most important ally, the United States. Why is he saying that? Well, the U.S. officials have reportedly threatened to scale back weapons and intelligence support if Ukraine refuses to sign this framework deal by next week, which is Thanksgiving, Jody.
Wow. Casey, as always, we appreciate you giving us updates on so many different issues. Always appreciate the great work that you do. All right, I want to go a little bit deeper now into the details of this 28-point peace plan for Ukraine and Russia and try to get a deeper assessment of it all. And joining me now to unpack the plan is Dr. J. Michael Waller. He's a senior analyst for strategy at the Center for Security Policy. Dr. Waller, welcome back to Washington Watch. Thank you for joining us.
Nice to be with you.
All right, let's kind of go through as much as we can of these 28 points. Let's start with the ones, I think it'd be good. Let's start with the ones that are likely that both sides could potentially agree without a fuss. What are we looking at there?
I really don't know where they can agree. This is something that's going to take a lot of leadership to force these both parties to accept. And Ukraine is going to have to accept loss of its territory. I mean, that was a given from the very beginning. On the other hand, I think it's premature to be demanding this because Russia can't sustain itself a whole lot longer. And so the rush to have a peace agreement by Thanksgiving, I think, is a danger.
Yeah, well, that being the case, you just brought up two powerful points. It sounds like we're probably not going to see this come to fruition. So if there are no points of little to no contention, what are the more controversial or contentious points that we could potentially see even more pushback than the ones that you just described?
I think one of them, it's a sort of the old State Department sick think, which is the idea of security guarantee. We already had two security guarantees for Ukraine, one in 1991 when the Russian government formally agreed to respect Ukraine's borders at that time, and another one from 1995 where the U.S. and Britain and Russia all agreed that if Ukraine would unilaterally disarm its nuclear arsenal, we would all ensure Ukraine's borders. There's no treaty commitment to it, but these are just assurances. So there are more assurances being offered, and certainly if I was a Ukrainian, I wouldn't buy it for a second.
So what kind of reactions at this point are coming forth? Are you hearing anything?
Right now, people are looking at it. It's pretty predictable of what's being heard. The Ukrainians don't like it. A lot of Russian opponents of Putin don't like it. They view it as a Russian-authored plan that was given to President Trump's envoy Witkoff and then recycled into a Trump plan. I don't know that to be a fact, but that's just what I'm hearing from some really high-profile opponents of Putin and very pro-U.S. and even very pro-Trump Russian opposition figures. So if that's the case, I don't see where a lot of these plans were cooked up in the State Department or on the U.S. side. A lot of them really do look like Russian talking points.
Oh, well, that's a very interesting thing here. So when we look at all this, obviously President Trump successfully was able to work through a peace deal with Israel and Hamas, at least successfully to this point. Things seem to be at least moving in the right direction. And this 28-point plan now for Russia and Ukraine, perhaps kind of similar, maybe not. Describe that to us. Are these basically similar, or are they different? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, they're different. They're two nation states, and they're two, Ukraine had been controlled by Moscow for so many years, so they're neighbors and they're established nation states, as opposed to Hamas, which is a terrorist organization. So you've got, there's not a real good comparison there. This is an imperial grab by Vladimir Putin to take territory of, first it was supposed to be Russian-speaking people in eastern Ukraine. That was his 2014 invasion. And then to take all of Ukraine, which was his attempt this time around. But it's just an imperial grab. Putin's got no legitimacy for it. I think his staying power is short. And I think while it's important to have some kind of peace agreement in place, don't give the Russians everything they ask for.
So do you think at the end of the day that this is a plan that potentially both sides can find common ground, or do you think at the end of the day we go back to the drawing board?
I think at the end of the day, go back to the drawing board, because every time there's a peace agreement idea being raised, the Russians come in and start attacking civilian targets left and right. I don't see how any kind of peace agreement can be solid until they not only stop doing that, but those responsible for it are held accountable. None of that is mentioned anywhere in the peace agreements.
So until that's dealt with, this thing, I don't see how it goes anywhere. Is there any way, do you think, to pull the reins in and to cause Putin to stop that kind of behavior?
There are ways to squeeze Russia harder and squeeze Putin harder, kick out a lot of the elements that are supporting him domestically, where the Trump administration has been trying to do that in some areas, but I think it's showing too much anxiety. When you let on too much that you're really desperate for a peace plan, then others are going to mess with you and manipulate you to their advantage. And I think that's part of the position that the U.S. is finding itself in now. Wow.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. J. Michael Waller, Senior Analyst for Strategy at the Center for Security Policy. I appreciate your input on this incredibly important discussion. Happy Thanksgiving to you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
All right, friends, coming up, we're going to go deeper into the HHS's peer-reviewed report that discredits the so-called gender transitions procedures on children. Dr. Jennifer Bowens will be joining me for that discussion, so stay tuned. We'll be back in just a moment.
What is God's role in government? What does the separation of church and state really mean? And how does morality shape a nation? President John Adams said our Constitution was made only for moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Join Family Research Council for God and Government, a powerful series that explores the connection between biblical principles and the American government, equipping you with truth to engage in today's most pressing debates. We'll uncover the foundations of our nation's history and why it's relevant for today. Join us to defend God's plan for government, because faith and freedom were never meant to be separate. You can view the course at prayvotestand.org/God and Government or on the Stand Firm app.
The book of Hebrews says that the Word of God is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing to the division of soul and of spirit, of joints and of marrow, and discerning the thoughts and intentions of the heart. Family Research Council invites you to join our Stand on the Word Bible reading plan as we finish our 2-year journey through the living and active Word of God before the new year. Join us for 10 to 15 minutes a day as we read the last books of the New Testament and discover that the Bible is one big story, a story of many words pointing to the Word, the one who is the same yesterday, today, and forever. The Word is alive, and His name is Jesus. Find our Bible reading plan and daily devotionals from Tony Perkins at frc.org/Bible. Join us, and may the Word of God come alive in you.
Are you looking for a meaningful gift to share this Christmas? Family Research Council has you covered. Check out the Stand on the Word official store for gear and gifts that are thoughtfully designed to help you wear, share, and stand boldly on Scripture. Check out our Christmas bundle for a $25 discount and order by November 23rd for delivery by Christmas. Text STORE to 67742. That's STORE to 67742.
Looking for a trusted source of news that shares your Christian values? Turn to the Washington Stand, your ultimate destination for informed, faith-centered reporting. Our dedicated team goes beyond the headlines, delivering stories that matter most to believers. From breaking events to cultural insights, we provide clear, compassionate coverage through a biblical lens. Discover news you can trust at the Washington Stand, where faith and facts meet every day.
Welcome back to Washington Watch, and good afternoon to you. I am your Friday host, Jody Heiss. Thank you so much for joining us. As we reported yesterday, the Trump administration's Department of Health and Human Services has dealt a major blow to the pervasive lies that are being promoted by the radical left on so-called gender transition procedures that are sold as cure-alls for children who are struggling with gender dysphoria. What false claims about so-called gender transition procedures did this peer-reviewed study tear down? That's what we want to discuss. And further, is the true nature that's behind all these procedures becoming more clear to the American public? Well, joining me now to discuss this is Dr. Jennifer Bowens. She's the Senior Research Fellow here at the Family Research Council. She's also the Director of American Values at the America First Policy Institute. Dr. Bowens, welcome back to Washington Watch, and great to see you again. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Am I?
Oh, there
yes,
we go. Yeah, we got you
okay,
coming
good.
now. Yep. Great to see you. Thanks for joining us. All right, for those who have not had the opportunity to dig into this HHS study, what are some of the top line findings as you get into this and look at it further?
Yeah, I think first of all, we owe a big thanks to the Trump administration's Health and Human Services, because for those of us who've worked on this issue, we know the vitriol that goes with it, and it can be a very challenging issue to just present the basic science. There's a lot of anger on the other side that we often have to contend with, and so this is great news that folks were willing to be put on the record and share what the findings are. And really, the findings, Jody, are not that new to those of us who've been working in this space for some time. This report showed what many other countries, their health services have shown, which is the evidence to support gender-affirming care is very low quality indeed. And that the proclaimed outcomes that gender-affirming care has promised, such as good psychological health, good quality of life, or even long-term health, have not proved to to be the case with gender-affirming care. So once again, we have yet another review that shows that the research just isn't there. It doesn't support this intervention.
It's really good news. This is a bombshell report. It seems like to me. Let me go a little bit deeper, because this is so much your field. What are some of the reasons in the first place that would cause a minor individual to take on a transgender identity?
Yeah. And here's the thing we have to remember is that this report is just looking at what shouldn't be done. It's not looking at some of the things that need to be addressed in these minors, such as the psychiatric issues that drove them to want to take on this trans identity in the first place. Certainly, we've seen from a number of studies that people who identify as transgender have many of them have traumatic backgrounds. Some have received information about the trans experience and felt that it explained why they have not fit in the world, which is also a developmental challenge that we all work through, right? So there are also people who have high rates of autism who are identifying as transgender. So we have this whole host of issues that should be addressed and should be helped, but instead haven't been addressed because of the stranglehold that some of these medical organizations, including organizations that I would be associated with in the psychological profession, that they've really put a clamp down on any kind of ingenuity that would take place on actually addressing the real issues that children have with this kind of identity distress, is what we could frame it as.
Yeah, and it's concerning that some of those organizations, like the American Psychiatric Association, for example, continue to push this stuff, even when the science is you're unfolding for us is simply not there. So what do you make, let me just push a little bit further, of, say, the American Academy of Pediatrics or the some of these others for refusing even to participate in this peer review study?
Yeah. And I think that's the beautiful thing about this report, is that it gave people on both sides of the issue an opportunity to respond. And so I think this is really important for the American people to understand that there was ample opportunity to address the concerns. And that's actually how science works, right? Good science says, let's debate this. Let's look at the evidence and see where it leads us. And if it's a good intervention, then we should be applauding the evidence and we should look to replicate it. It doesn't mean that that's the end of the scientific inquiry. It just means that, like for this time period, this is where the evidence is leading us. But you don't see that with these particular professional groups. You see them walking away and taking that opportunity and scrapping it. And that should be very telling for all of us, because if you have an intervention that's so great, you should want to go out there and defend it. But I would also add to this, Jody, is that we're talking about vulnerable minors who are being subject to lifelong changes through these interventions. We've heard from Chloe Cole when she was given essentially a mastectomy, but it was in the name of gender-affirming care. She will never have those body parts back again. And so the level of evidence should rise to a new level, and to think that these organizations are backing away from the opportunity to defend their position is frightening, and
really
it's
frightening.
telling.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Thank you so much, Dr. Jennifer Bowen, the Senior Research Fellow at FRC. Your insights and expertise, always great and welcome. Thank you for joining us. Happy Thanksgiving to you. All right, coming up next, the Chinese Communist Party continues to speak loudly over Taiwan, and we'll talk more about it Stay tuned.
3 years ago, the Supreme Court issued its historic Dobbs decision, a ruling that overturned Roe v. Wade, which for nearly 50 years imposed abortion on demand, silencing voters and bypassing the democratic process across the country. The Dobbs decision was a huge step forward against abortion, but it didn't outright ban it. It returned the power to the people. Now, 29 states have laws on the books protecting life. However, there's a catch. Abortion numbers since Dobbs have actually gone up, with an increase of 12% since 2020, climbing from 930,000 to over 1 million in each of the most recent years. So how can this be? The answer is simple: the abortion drug. Today, over 60% of U.S. abortions involve abortion drugs, many of these without medical oversight. In 2021, the Biden administration quietly removed bare minimum long-standing safety protocols for the abortion drug that have existed for 20 years to protect women from life-threatening risks and ensuring informed consent. The Biden DOJ then declared that they would not enforce the Comstock Act, which prevents the mailing of anything that causes an abortion. This is not only illegal, but also dangerous. A study shows nearly 11% of women who take the abortion drug end up in the emergency room with serious complications. Unless the Trump administration reverses these reckless Biden-era policies, pro-life laws will remain largely symbolic. Without a full review and repeal of mifepristone, unborn lives will remain in grave danger, and pregnant mothers will remain at risk. Let's stand for life and end this mail-order abortion drug pipeline. Sign the petition urging the Trump administration to take action at frc.org/stopchemicalabortion.
Welcome back. So glad to have you joining us today on Washington Watch. I'm your Friday host, Jody Heiss. Thanks so much for tuning in today. All right, this week, the U.S.-China Economic Security Review Commission released its annual report to Congress. And according to the report, the Chinese Communist Party and its military forces are preparing their entire country for a future war with the United States over Taiwan. And while this may not be a surprise to some, the question is whether or not America is doing what it can for when that day arrives. Well, joining me now to discuss this is Asia expert Gordon Chang. He's a senior fellow at the Gatestone Institute and author of Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America. And you can follow him on X under the handle at Gordon G. Chang. Gordon, always great to have you on Washington Watch. Welcome back.
Thanks so much, Jody.
Okay, this report is quite lengthy, but what are some of the big takeaways when you look at it?
The big takeaway is that China is, as you pointed out, is on a war footing. And also because of their preparations, that we'll have very little notice when China decides to actually invade Taiwan or do something else. So for instance, this report talks about how these exercises that China is conducting near Taiwan, they look like rehearsals for war, and that China can make the decision during one of these exercises to actually invade, and we would not know that until maybe it's too late. So those, I think, are the most important takeaways. Everything else we've known about the China's rapid military buildup, it's on us now to respond correctly.
Wow. Was there anything in this report that surprised you? I mean, you have an incredible pulse on what's happening there, but were there any surprises that jumped out to you?
The thing that I thought was important was the thing that surprised me was just, and I've heard this before, but I'm glad the report emphasized it, and I was surprised that they actually talked about it, and that was how China is very close to going to war. We've known that for quite some time. The one thing that I'm concerned about is essentially that that China, because of the turmoil inside the regime right now, could end up in a war, not because it decides to go to war, but because of a confrontation that cannot be controlled. Right now, the Chinese regime, in a state of turmoil, can't de-escalate, can't act constructively with the international community, and therefore could very well slip itself into war along with everybody else.
Wow. So this is an extremely volatile situation. I know at the end of the report there were like 28 recommendations. Are there any of those that were kind of like exclamation points to you, points that need to be broadcast?
I think that the most important thing is that we need to actually go to a war footing ourselves. And if you look at the totality of those recommendations, that's essentially what they say, because they say that we're not prepared. And so when you put all that together, it does say that we're no longer at peace. And that's an important message for everybody.
It sure is. So given that, what would you want to stress to those in Washington, D.C.?
I think the President of the United States needs to get behind the Resolute desk in front of a camera and address the situation with the American people, and to say that China is rapidly preparing for war, and that there are other factors that indicate that war could come soon, and that the United States needs to get prepared. And one of those things is civil defense. And the other thing is for Americans to, if they see something, to say something. We talked a lot about that after 9/11. We need to do it now because we know that China has networks of agents, operatives, and soldiers in our country, and they're just ready to strike. And we know this because of what they've been doing already in terms of trying to intrude into our military bases, as well as engage in illicit surveillance through drones and other means. So that's the first thing I think that needs to be done. Once that happens, a lot of other things will follow automatically. But until we know that we're at war, in a war setting, we're not going to take those steps that are necessary.
Yep, great point. And you think helping us get to that point would greatly be increased if the president took some public action and stated so. So let me ask you this. What do you think the likelihood is of a future war over Taiwan breaking out during this administration? Do you think we're that close?
It could happen at any time, Jody. And I don't think it's necessarily that they decide to go to war over Taiwan. Right now, there is very provocative actions that China is taking against both the Philippines in the South China Sea, at places like Scarborough Shoal, and against the Japanese because of what people call a spat, but which is really a long-term confrontation between Beijing and Tokyo. Those are the things I worry about, because if there is a belligerent act, if people die, then the war is going to spread throughout the region, including Taiwan. So that's how I think Taiwan gets involved, through the back door. Taiwan right now is too hard a target. I think the Chinese are looking at other places to engage in very belligerent, very hostile activity.
So very interesting. So you think it will come from one of those other reasons and then just pull Taiwan into it?
And pull the United States and Japan and Australia and Russia and North Korea. It's a general war throughout East Asia.
Wow. Gordon Chang, Senior Fellow at the Gatestone Institute, is always great to have you on the program. We deeply appreciate your insight and your input. Thank you for joining us today. Happy Thanksgiving to you.
Happy Thanksgiving, Jody, and thank you very much.
All right, coming up, former U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, Sam Brownback, will be joining me with some very pressing religious freedom issues that the entire world is facing. You don't want to miss this segment. We'll bring it your way on the other side of the break.
For over 4,000 years, the Jewish people have had legal, historical, and biblical ties to the land of Israel, especially the heartland of Israel, Judea and Samaria, which much of the world still calls the West Bank. To Israelis, Judea and Samaria is far more than a name. It's the center of their ancestral homeland where nearly 80% of the Bible's events took place. Abraham purchased property in Hebron, Jacob in Shechem, Joshua made an altar on Mount Ebal and led the Israelites into a covenant before God. On Mount Gerizim, overlooking Shechem, Jesus talked to the Samaritan woman at the well about worshiping neither on Mount Gerizim nor in Jerusalem, but in spirit and in truth. Judea and Samaria is nearly a quarter of Israel's current landmass, not a small strip of land on the Jordan River, but a vital and strategic part of the nation's identity. The October 7th massacre launched from Gaza shattered the illusion that giving away territory brings peace. Gaza, which was once seen as the cornerstone of a two-state solution, became a launchpad for terror. Today, only 21% of Israelis support a Palestinian state. Trust in a two-state solution has all but collapsed. The Middle East is changing. Iran's grip is weakening, new alliances are forming, but Western countries and some U.S. officials still chase the mirage of a two-state solution. History speaks clearly. The 2005 Gaza withdrawal, backed by the U.S., led not to peace, but to a terrorist regime. Judea and Samaria are 24 times larger than Gaza, deeply woven into Israel's geographic and spiritual fabric. To surrender them would not bring peace. It would invite conflict and existential danger. Family Research Council stands with Israel's rightful claim to sovereignty. It's time for America to do the same, for history, for justice, and for lasting security in the Middle East.
How should Christians think about the thorny issues shaping our culture? How should Christians address deceitful ideas like transgenderism, critical theory, or assisted suicide? How can Christians navigate raising children in a broken culture, the war on gender roles, or rebuilding our once great nation? Outstanding is a podcast from the Washington Stand dedicated to these critical conversations. Outstanding seeks to tear down what our corrupt culture lifts up with an aim to take every thought and every idea captive to the obedience of Christ. Whether policies or partisan politics, whether conflict in America or conflict abroad, join us and our guests as we examine the headlines through the lens of Scripture and explore how Christians can faithfully exalt Christ in all of life. Follow Outstanding on your favorite podcast app and look for new episodes each week.
Thank you for joining us today. Good afternoon. Welcome back to Washington Watch. I'm your Friday host, Jody Heiss. Thank you so much for tuning in. All right, look, for those of you who are watching the program today, you've probably noticed that I'm sporting the official Stand on the Word fleece vest. And I'll tell you, I love it. And if you like this vest, you'll be glad to know that it's part of our brand new Stand on the Word store. And we've put together a collection of various items that are all inspired by the Stand on the Word Bible reading plan. It's all designed to encourage you, your family, and your friends to keep standing on God's Word. And I can tell you, vests like the one I'm wearing and a host of other gifts will make wonderful Christmas gifts. But in order to ensure that you get it before Christmas, you need to order your gift by this Sunday, November 23rd, this Sunday. And so to check it out, go look at the store, all the various things that are there. Simply text the word store to 67742. That's store to 67742. And speaking of standing on the Word, well, we've got a lot of people right now who are struggling around the world to do that without suffering tremendous persecution. There have been reports circulating today of an attack on a Catholic school in Nigeria. It's resulted in the abduction of some 52 children along with the staff. It took place early in the morning at the St. Mary's School in Nigeria's Niger State, and that follows a similar incident earlier this week where armed attackers reportedly kidnapped some 25 girls from a boarding school in the Kebbi state of Nigeria. And there's more and more and more attention being drawn to this West African country, and thanks in part to the Trump administration's redesignation of Nigeria as a country of particular concern. And with Nigeria under the microscope, let's all continue to pray that we may soon see an end to all the targeting of Christians there. And joining me now to dive further into this and more is Sam Brownback. He's a former U.S. Senator, Kansas Governor, and the U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom. Ambassador Brownback, always great to have you on Washington Watch. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, happy to join you, Jody. And all this tough news, I do hope everybody's getting ready also as well for a good Thanksgiving. We've got a lot to be thankful for, but we got a lot of Christians around the world that aren't in such good positions.
We sure are. And listen, before we get to Nigeria, I wanted to start off, if I could, real quickly with China. Don't know if you were able to hear the previous segment. We had Gordon Chang on, and we were talking about how the Chinese Communist Party and its military forces are reportedly preparing the entire country for a future war with the United States over Taiwan. But there's another war going on right now in China, and that's the war on religion. And we've had a congressional hearing that you testified at just yesterday. So I wanted to begin there with your thoughts on that hearing and what was highlighted in that.
Well, what I highlighted, and other people pointed out as well, is that China is at war with faith. We've known that, and that's been the case since the communists took over 70 years ago. But there is a prospect for us here, if we will look at religious freedom as a national security issue and not just as a human right, we can back and should back the religious people within China, and they're our greatest ally. And Jody, one of the things I said yesterday, and I firmly believe, is that the Chinese Communist Party fears religious freedom in their own country more, much more, than they fear our aircraft carriers or our nuclear weapons. They view that as the real threat to their dominance and their control at home.
That is amazing to think of it from that perspective. So from that lens, through that lens, Ambassador, how should the U.S. respond to the rising persecution there in China?
We should respond by wholeheartedly backing the people of faith, of all faiths, throughout China. I mean, we're backing the people that are opposed to our greatest enemy in the world, which is the Chinese Communist Party, not the Chinese people, Chinese Communist Party. And we should back the Muslim Uyghurs. We should back the Tibetan Buddhists. We should back the Falun Gong. We should back the Christians that are being persecuted and increasingly taken as hostages in their negotiation with the United States. We should develop a national security strategy to support religious freedom inside of China. These are things that we can do. And I laid out yesterday a series of specific items within each of these faith communities that we could support that would show our support for religious freedom and would critically undermine the Chinese Communist Party and their authority if we can get some air and oxygen to these religious communities.
And therein lies what you were talking about is approaching this whole thing as a national security issue. The longer the Christian community, the stronger they are in China and other faiths, I suppose, the better that is for us.
Absolutely. You know, look at religious freedom for us is a cornerstone human right. You don't have a United States of America without religious freedom at our founding and guaranteeing free exercise. People came here to freely practice their faith. That's what the pilgrims came for to start off with. The communists look at it exactly opposite. They look at religious freedom as an existential threat to their control. Well, we should do the very American thing and support religious freedom within that country, standing for their human right. And it's something that it will really undermine the Chinese communists.
Excellent point. Okay, Ambassador, if I can kind of shift gears with you, let's turn back to Nigeria. You know, what happened there this morning, I think if an attack and a kidnapping like what took place in Nigeria today had happened in the U.S. or somewhere else in the world for that matter, there would be absolute shock. But unfortunately, this is not out of the ordinary in Nigeria, is it, what's going on here?
Unfortunately, not at all. Praise God for President Trump, who's raised the issue of Nigeria back on the global stage and pointed out these horrific situations. It's the most deadly place in the world to be a Christian today. And you saw these examples just today. The president redesignated them a country of particular concern. We'd done that in the first Trump, just did it in the second. Now we need to follow it up with actions. We need to get in place a situation there that can guarantee that diverse population in Nigeria that they can live quiet and peaceful lives. We need to really work at this in a long-term basis and raise it up. I've been co-hosting and working with different groups of Nigerian activists about this, what sort of things we can do. There are a number of things that can be engaged with, but we do need to act. We can't just say this is a problem anymore. We're going to have to act on this to be able to stop the carnage that keeps happening there.
All right, excellent point. So now we have them designated as a country of particular concern. President Trump himself went after them for what he described as the mass murder, or mass slaughter, I think were his words, of Christians. We've had U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Mike Waltz, held an event highlighting the ongoing violence there in Nigeria. So, but you say we need action, not just talk. So what needs to take place? We are certainly rising the attention of what's there, increased attention of what's going on in Nigeria. How does that go hand in hand with what type of particular actions that we should be doing next?
It does. You got to raise the awareness and people's willingness to act, but you could clearly start out with a series of very targeted sanctions against the actors in Nigeria, the leaders of the actors in Nigeria, to targeted sanctions against them. You could do very targeted sanctions against the Nigerian economy of exports that they have coming to the United States to show we're not going to tolerate this anymore. But ultimately, you really have got to get at that security situation on the ground for Christians, particularly in the middle belt and the northern part of the country. That's where the carnage is really happening. And we've got to be able to provide, have people providing protection to these Christian communities that are there so that they're not attacked. Right now, they get attacked and they're virtually defenseless, and the military and the government doesn't respond either timely or they respond fecklessly, and it just keeps taking place. So ultimately, we've got to get at that specific security situation in Nigeria.
Wow. All right, let me switch gears with you again and take this discussion a little step further. As you well know, President Trump met with the Saudi Crown Prince in Washington earlier this week. And the Saudi prince communicated to Trump his desire for some increased American involvement in managing the humanitarian crisis in Sudan. But, and here's the question that goes to what we're talking about and broadens it. There were some Republicans even who argued that the president needs to focus less on foreign policy and more on domestic issues. What's your take on that, given the type of foreign issues that we're experiencing right now?
Well, you can do both, and this president does do both, and we're going to need to continue to do both. Sudan is the largest humanitarian crisis in the world. I've traveled in the country multiple times. They think in this current crisis they're in, 400,000 people have died. And the president has thankfully agreed to step up. Now, I presume in his discussions with the Saudi prince, they're talking about the Saudis invested $1 trillion into the United States. That's going to help our economy. And the Saudis in return are asking, Mr. President, help solve this problem. To me, that's helping the U.S. economy. If you're helping somebody that's going to put $1 trillion investment in the U.S. economy, and we can do it. We've done it before on Sudan. We had this split of the northern part from South Sudan. The Christians were in the south, the Muslims in the north, and that's helped. It's been difficult. It's had its difficulties in its early stages. But I think really the president, who's been a massive peacemaker around the world, this is something we can step up and we can do, and he can do both. And in fact, by doing this, is doing both.
Great point. So let me ask you this. There's The State Department is, at least some are stating that the State Department is giving more attention to violations against God-given rights than they are fabricated rights, like the right to abort babies or mutilate gender-confused children and so forth. You have been for a long time a phenomenal champion on religious freedom and life and a host of other things. But how important is it to make clear what rights are God-given, what rights are inalienable, especially when there are so many fabricated so-called rights that conflict with inalienable rights? How important is this discussion?
It's a critical discussion to have. When Mike Pompeo was Secretary of State, he held an Inalienable Rights Commission and to try to get at the very issue. And the long and the short of it, to me, what we should be doing is we should say those rights that are in the UN Charter of Human Rights that the entire world has signed on to, those are your basic human rights, and those are the ones we're going to protect. And all these other items, we can have discussions about them if you want to have, but they're not in the core of what the world has agreed to. The right to an abortion is not in the UN Charter of Human Rights. The right to change a gender is not in the Charter of UN Human Rights. Let's go back to the basic document that the world agreed to on human rights, and let's build off of that. And fundamental within it, Article 18, is religious freedom of people being able to choose their own faith or to change their faith however they might choose themselves. It's the human right of the soul to be able to do this. And it's a fundamental, I believe, cornerstone human right that we really need to elevate and make it into a national security issue.
That's why we love you so much. Your stance over the years, so powerful. We've got just a little over a minute left. So your take on this: the role of Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom is currently empty. President Trump's nominee, former North Carolina Congressman Mark Walker, he's waited now more than 7 months for Senate confirmation. Your thoughts on this?
He needs to get confirmed. We need a person in that position, with human rights and religious freedom in particular being such a fundamental issue right now in a place like Nigeria and that entire region of the Sahel, in a place like China, where it's our best tool, I believe, against the Chinese Communist Party. You need your point person, and that's that ambassador role for international religious freedom. I really want to urge the Senate to take that nomination up, get the confirmation hearing done, put him on a vote yet this year so you can get your point person inside the administration to start working and get him out traveling around the world to work hands-on on a number of these situations that the president has elevated, thankfully, but we need people to do the follow-through.
Absolutely. Ambassador Sam Brownback, it's always an honor to speak with you, always an honor to have you on Washington Watch. Thank you so much for coming on and for having such a bold stance for so long. God bless you. Happy Thanksgiving to you and your family. All right, friends, that wraps it up. Hope you have a great weekend, and we'll be back with you again next week here on Washington Watch.
Washington Watch with Tony Perkins is brought to you by Family Research Council. To support our efforts to advance faith, family, and freedom, please text GIVE to 67742. That's GIVE to 67742. Portions of the show discussing candidates are brought to you by Family Research Council Action. For more information, please visit TonyPerkins.com.